Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Updates to the AP World Language and Culture exam presented by Val Lupino. My name is Sabrina, and I'm part of the team at KWL Languages, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we begin, just a quick clarification. This is a CLED World Languages webinar. So AP is a trademark registered by the College Board, which is not affiliated with and does not endorse this webinar. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Val Lupino. Val is an experienced educator and consultant who has worked extensively with world language teachers and AP programs. Today, she'll walk us through the recent updates to the AP World Language and Culture exam, what they mean for classrooms, and how teachers can help students prepare. Val, thank you so much for being here today. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. So just a little bit of some information. This little recording that I'm going to do now is just in addition to the recording from yesterday evening because there were some technical issues with the beginning of the webinar and I didn't want you to miss out on some of this really important information. So if you see that I'm dressed a little differently, that's why you're not having a time lapse, but we just wanted to make sure that you had all the pertinent information available to you. So for this webinar, there are certain things we're going to cover about the new exam that will take effect in the 2026-2027 school year, which means the students will see this new exam in May of 2027. So we're going to go over the exam overview, which I'm going to take some time to go over the changes and the format of the actual exam that the students will see in May. We're going to talk a little bit of the skills and the learning objectives and how they have been repurposed and reduced in number to be more appropriate for the classroom and for the students. So it's directly correlated for the students in the classroom, and they're much more attainable, and they are more closely linked to the tasks. Then we're going to take some time to look at the recommended context, which some of us veteran AP teachers know as our 6 themes. We still have 6. However, now they go under the terminology of recommended context, and under the recommended context, just like before with the themes, there are some sub-contexts that are recommended to cover for that bigger umbrella topic. And then we'll get to the part of the exam that I would say is the most new and different part for even in our classroom to adapt to our lessons, etc. And that is the project, the research project presentation, etc. And then we're going to take some time to just chat about moving forward, how with these changes in the exam, what type of changes you can expect in your other classes to better prepare your students for taking an AP course and being ready for the task types of the AP exam. Okay. So exam overview. So just as a general look at what has happened to the course, the AP course in world languages for the FIGs for French, Italian, German, and Spanish. We are now aligned though with, you'll see it says aligned 6 world language courses because we are also aligned with Chinese and Japanese. However, in this webinar, everything that I share with you is really applicable to the FIGs. So it's the French, Italian, German, and Spanish. As we go through the webinar, you might see on the bottom that the source reference is the AP Italian CED because I teach Italian. So therefore, I just took it from the materials that I have readily available to me as an Italian teacher. However, please do not fear. The information I'm sharing with you is completely the same for the other Romance languages. So we will have a digital delivery via Blue Book. If you are not familiar with that term, Blue Book is a digital testing platform that's used by the College Board in other assessments. The students are very familiar with it as they use it for their PSATs and SATs. So really, it's more of a new thing for teachers and proctors. However, some proctors may have proctored other standardized tests, so they're familiar with it. It won't be new to the majority of the students. They'll actually be quite ready to work with that platform. All components of the AP exam in 2027 will be digital. So they will do their FRQs and their MCQs via the Blue Book. For the typing of the essay in Blue Book, there is accents embedded in there, kind of like a little pop-up window for them to use. And it's timed, so every section only proceeds to the next one when the time elapses. So no one can jump ahead in a free response without having completed the allocated time. We have simplified course frameworks to remove redundancies and better align with the task types. So that's where I alluded to streamlining the skills and learning objectives. We have fewer task types and a consistent number of items in each set. So when you hear task type, what that really is the type of source material the students are seeing for the multiple choice questions. So for example, an article or an infographic or a chart, etc. And then the number of items references the number of questions. And we'll just chat about that in a few slides. The 6 units now come with a suggested instructional context, and we'll take a look at those. We have now incorporated, obviously, the course project with research to authentically assess speaking on exam day. And we've converted the scoring guidelines from holistic to analytic to increase scoring reliability. As an AP reader, I'm very excited for the new rubrics because I feel that they leave little room for an AP reader to be left for interpretation. It is much more structured, and I truly believe that it will give students a much more accurate, reliable score. Okay, so looking at this, you are going to see the new sequence of the exam. In previous years, the multiple choice questions always came first, and then the students had a pause, and then they did the free response section of the exam. Now you will see the free response will come first. So this was decided upon after piloting and looking at data results. The free response questions now include the project presentation worth 20% of the exam grade, the project Q&A worth 15%, and the argumentative essay worth an additional 15%. So the mentality behind this switch is, the thought process behind this switch is that the students will now produce the language that they've been preparing to produce throughout their course, throughout the project first. Therefore, it will decrease student test anxiety. It will decrease that anxiousness of, oh, when am I going to do that? When am I going to do that? I'm doing these multiple choice questions, but when am I going to get to that presentation? What if I forget something? So it really allows the student to get that chunk of the exam out of the way, for lack of a better term, and that then they can just kind of calm down and focus on the multiple choice questions. Before, when we had it reversed, several teachers, several proctors, etc., have always expressed that there's student fatigue by the time they got to writing their email, writing their essay, and then speaking. After you've been testing for all those hours, the language production I feel was probably compromised. So having this at the beginning really gives the students that fresh start, that as soon as they start the exam, they're showcasing their knowledge. And then they move into, after their break, they move into the multiple choice questions. Listening will still come first and then reading. You will see that obviously in the free response questions, the email has been eliminated, for lack of better terms, and so has the simulated conversation. And technically, so has the cultural comparison speaking. However, the cultural comparison speaking is technically revamped in the project presentation, because that is where the students will show their cultural competency, as well as in the project Q&A. And the project Q&A is the new conversation task. But please note, it is by definition a Q&A. Students will be presented with a question twice and then have 40 seconds to answer. And then it'll proceed to the next question, 40 seconds to answer, so on and so forth. The email has been removed because it was not a very authentic source to have as a written task. And therefore, the College Board has really tried to increase authenticity of sources because we want to make sure our students are constantly exposed to authentic real world material. So talking about the multiple choice questions, I alluded to in the beginning that there were a reduced number of task types and also a certain number of items per task type. So you'll see here that the number of sets, so they will have still those combined resources, but if you scan this, you will see there is no longer a audio and a text. So they will no longer read a long article and then listen to an audio, but rather they will have a combo of audio and image and text and image. So those are the two types of combined task types that they will see on the exam. And notice that they will, I don't want to say only, but they will have a standard number of questions of 5 multiple choice questions per task type. In the bottom section, you'll see that there's a total of 6 possible combinations of that article, text and image, literary text, and promotional material. So on any given exam, that could change. For example, I could have 2 promotional material and then one of the other ones and 2 of another. So that can change exam by exam. But what is nice is now you can prepare your students with this standard number of questions, and it helps with the degree of questioning. And again, just to repeat, there is still the combo, but it's no longer article and audio, but rather audio and image and text and image. So in the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that the skills and learning objectives have been reduced, but also streamlined. So the reduction doesn't cut back at all in the amount of the type of skills, but instead they're much more focused and I think more student-centered and applicable for them to even understand. So you have the skill category 1, excuse me, which focuses on interpretive communication and therefore is directly correlated to the multiple choice questions. However, it's important to note that the skill category 1 is still applicable to our free response questions in that they are still needing those skills and learning objectives to interpret the sources. But right away, you can see by the words recognize, interpret, synthesize, and infer meaning. It's really the input of the student, what they're taking in from those sources. Skill category 2 is interpersonal and presentational communication, and therefore lends itself directly to the free response questions, where the students are focusing on producing the language, whether it be in spoken and or written formats. And last but not least, the skill category 3 is cultural understanding. And this is where the students will demonstrate their cultural competency, their understanding of making connections within and across cultures. As for the multiple choice questions, the students may be presented with a source that has culturally authentic content. However, the multiple choice questions will not assess the student's understanding of that cultural content, but rather the questions will focus more on the learning objectives of skill category 1, where they're determining the main idea, the intended audience, the perspective or tone, etc. So here in this learning objectives of skill category 1, you'll see that there is no reference to being able to, like, there's no reference to where the multiple choice question will assess their cultural competency. It is really focused on comprehending the texts, the audio, and or the visuals. And therefore, that's why they're connected to the multiple choice questions. But also, like I said, they are part of the free response because in the argumentative essay, they have to interpret the sources. And in their project, they will have to interpret the sources that are provided by the College Board. However, they will also have to interpret their own sources that they research. For learning objective skill category number 2, we see that these are very closely related to the free response questions of the exam because it tells very clearly that the students are speaking and writing in either an interpersonal or presentational context. They're sharing ideas, they're applying their skills, they are also making sure that everything is organized, they're using communication strategies, they're expressing ideas, etc. So here, this is really the nuts and bolts of the free response questions. And I think even if you would share these with your students, it's easier for them to make a connection to what they are learning and what they are producing. And then last but not least, we have the learning objective skill category number 3, which is the cultural understanding. These specific learning objectives and skill category are directly connected to the presentation of the project and the project Q&A, because that is where the student will now need to describe cultural products, practices, and perspectives. They'll have to compare those cultural products and perspectives among distinct communities within the target language. So therefore, that's referencing the target community that they select to research for their project. And they'll have to reflect on the significance of these cultural products, practices, and perspectives, and how it applies to them. What is the connection to their community or region? So this skill category is really covers that, the 3 Ps and the cultural component of the project. And then we move into the recommended context. So as I alluded to in the introduction, we have 6 recommended contexts for the world language exams. So in the little blue bubble are the new recommended instructional contexts. You have language and culture, science and technology, global context, families and communities, art and creativity, and contemporary life. And then you'll see there bulleted are the recommended instructional contexts for the major contexts. So these don't necessarily live in isolation, and they are fluid and adaptable under any context. So, for example, literature, right? It falls under the context of art and creativity. However, we clearly could talk about contemporary life, depending on the excerpt of literature we have. We can easily talk about families and communities, depending on the excerpt of literature that we use. So there's a ton of overlap, and we'll talk about some concerns that have come up even with my colleagues at work, talking about how maybe a topic that they once covered in their AP class, they feel maybe they can no longer cover it because it's not listed here. But if you carefully look at all the little bullets, it's almost just like the topics, the contexts have been repurposed, renamed, reimagined, and made a little bit more current. Like, for example, the addition of pop culture to the contemporary life context. It's making the context more attainable to our audience. We all know one of the biggest struggles is to keep students engaged. Well, having contexts that keep them engaged really helps us keep them interested in the world language, but also keep them interested enough to want to explore topics of the world language, which lends itself to the project. And the project. So this is the biggest change to the world language exam. The project is a process. We cannot look at the project as your average in-class project that you may have been doing or have done in your other classes or even in AP. There are 4 distinct phases to the project. In the course and exam description, the CED for the AP course that you teach, you will see that ideally the project has been designed to take 15 days. And the 15 days are for a class, an average of 45 minutes. So I'm well aware that not everyone has a 45-minute class period. Some teachers teach a block schedule. and have a longer class period. Some might not see their students every day. So when you do get the CED for your language, please don't be discouraged if you see that it's 15 days thinking, oh, it's not enough time. And also don't get discouraged if you think it's too much time. It's only a recommendation. So if in your class you take more time, you take more time. If you take less time, you take less time. The only thing you want to keep in mind is the January and April bookends, let's call them. So in January, and till now, I do not have an exact date in January, but at some point in January, the College Board will publish the course project on the AP Digital Portfolio. The students, teachers, anyone enrolled in the AP course via the College Board will receive the project prompt with the factors that they should use to guide their research. They will get a source materials packet, which will contain 6 to 8 College Board approved sources that range from an article to an infographic to a chart to an audio. So it's all the same task types that we have in like the multiple choice questions and the argumentative essay, but now they'll be presented to the student that cover generically the project prompt. Now, I stress generically because the 6 to 8 sources that come in the source materials packet may not be country specific or region specific. They are always target language community specific, but they will be general enough to pique and spark the interest of the student. So, for example, maybe you have colleagues that did the pilot for the project, but for example, the pilot for the project was about study abroad. The 6 to 8 sources could have been about, so for example, for Spanish, the culture shock of going to study abroad, universities in Spain, universities in Peru. I don't know, I don't teach Spanish, but the sources were generic, meaning the student is supposed to use those 6 to 8 sources to gain interest so that they then can pick a target community to focus their project research on. And when that is all released, the students will also get 4 initial written reflection questions. Those 4 initial written reflection questions are the questions that they will answer when they complete their initial written reflection in phase 1 of the project. So that's bookend number 1 is January. You, the students, yourself, and anyone enrolled will receive the guts, let's call them, of the project. And then the other date to keep in mind is April 30th. April 30th is the day that the students will have to submit via the digital portfolio their PPR, their personalized project reference sheet. The personalized project reference sheet is something that they prepare in phase 3 of the project. It will have a word limit to it. It will be presented to them in the target language, and it is the document that they will use to prepare an outline of their presentation that they will validate on exam day. So on April 30th, the students have taken the time to prepare this personalized project reference. It's only an outline. Like I said, it'll have a word limit, and it'll be given to them again on exam day for them to use as an outline to do their presentation on exam day live via the Blue Book. So those are the 2 dates that you should keep in mind when thinking about this project. So again, in the CED, it'll be presented to you as a 15-day project. However, if you want to stretch it out, you are obviously more than welcome to. If you want to shrink it, again, more than welcome to. The students will have access to the project materials as of January. So how you manage that in your class is up to you. Personally, if I could foresee students having access to something and therefore having questions about it already. So ideally, it's maybe something you would want to start in that second semester in January, and then maybe stretch out the other phases so that you get closer to the April 30th date. But what I just would like you to stress is that you do have flexibility. The point of the project is not to put a structured feel on the AP teacher. So they receive the information in January. And then, like you can see here, they're the 4 phases of the project. So phase 1 is explore and understand. And the title is pretty self-explanatory. The students will explore the project prompt, prior knowledge of the topic, and the source materials packet. They will start to understand the prompt better. They will start to understand which route they want their project to take. And they will explore potential regions of the target language in which they want to focus their project. And they will complete the initial written reflection. In phase 2, students investigate and apply. They receive feedback from their initial written reflection. They create an action plan to plan their investigation. They put their plan into action. They develop findings. They interpret and synthesize their research. They explore examples and describe the relationship between our 3 Ps, the products, practices, and perspectives. In phase 3 of the project, create and evaluate, students complete the PPR, the personalized project reference sheet, that again is only an outline and is printed and distributed to them on exam day. They will develop strategies for a quality presentation, and they will complete a practice presentation, and there will be feedback forms available on AP Classroom for them to use for self-feedback, evaluation, peer feedback, peer evaluation, and obviously one between the teacher and the student. In phase 4, students anticipate possible questions for the Q&A. I'm sorry, this is where they reflect on their project and on their research, and they grow in the sense of want to expand their knowledge of the topic that they've spent all this time researching. This is where they practice and prepare for the Q&A session. They demonstrate cultural understanding because part of the Q&A, part of how the Q&A questions will be designed, it will encourage the student to compare and express their knowledge on the 3 Ps. And from a linguistic standpoint, it's a great opportunity to review the linguistic resources associated with speech language functions. Okay. So if we take a look at the project, in phase 1, in the explore and understand, it's designed, so it's at 15 days, but in phase 1 in the CED, we've designed it to take up approximately 5 class periods. And this is where the teacher and the student will work together individually with peers to really investigate the prompt and the source materials provided by the College Board. The student will use the source materials and the 4 initial reflection questions that were released to them with the prompt to complete the initial written reflection. And the initial written reflection is something that the teachers will grade. Teachers could use it as a summative. Teachers could use it as a formative grade. Teachers could use it as just classwork grade, but it's going to fall on the teacher to grade that. The grade will not be reported to the College Board in any way. The College Board also will never see the initial written reflection that the students prepare. So one of the questions that has come up with my colleagues and in other settings is, why do the initial written reflection if it is not scored by the College Board? Because unfortunately, we know that our students are often motivated by grades, credits, GPA, etc. All I can say is that the initial written reflection is designed to help the student jump into the topic of the project. So if I'm given a prompt and I'm giving source materials. And these source materials are generic in nature in the sense that they cover the topic of the prompt, but they're not specific to a certain city or country or region or community. I'm going to want to explore those sources, and I'm going to want to start to develop my perspective on this topic. And the way I can start to develop my perspective on this topic is to start to complete a reflection. I can, in my written reflection, express where I want my research to go. In my written reflection, I can express which community I want to focus on. In my written reflection, I might even ask myself questions. What else do I need to understand this prompt better? What else do I need to truly understand how this topic applies to a certain community? So if we look back at the exam format and how everything is weighted, the project presentation in the free response section is going to be worth 20% of that 50%. And the initial written reflection is a great foundational component of the project that truly helps the students develop their topic and lead to a stronger presentation. So in phase 2, we have investigate and apply. So again, they're going to create a research action plan to map out the investigation process. They're going to enact a research plan that uses authentic resources specific to selected factors. They will finalize selection of target region and community to study, and they'll further develop the 3 Ps as they relate to the prompt. So here are some CED project manual specific vocab. So the action plan is something that's referenced to in the CED, and so is factors. So when the students received the prompt in January, for example, with the pilot, it was study abroad. The factors, some of them were lodging, some of them were scholarship, some of them were programs of study. So they're more like elements or specific topics that students choose to elaborate their research for the prompt. The action plan, when you see it in the CED, is also designed for the students to use SMART goals. It helps them have a specific topic and community that they're going to study. They set a measurable goal for themselves in that they want to cover 3 factors. They set achievable goals within that. So of those 3 factors, what am I truly going to focus on and where am I going to get this research accomplished? Am I going to use if we use the pilot prompt as an example, am I going to use a university website to research that program? Am I going to look at student housing? Am I going to look at apartments for rent? So achievable resource materials and relevant. Relevant goes hand in hand with authentic. So teachers do need, if they haven't been doing research in the past, do need to set some time in their classrooms to go over how to find relevant research and how to make sure you're using an authentic source. So what might be a good idea as you prepare for your AP class next year would be, if you don't already have one, is maybe prepare a list of resources for your students. So websites that they can go to that have authentic sources, news sites, books, um, anything that you think would help your students achieve this goal. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that students aren't researching non-authentic sites, meaning they're not just researching a site that actually is in English and has been translated into Spanish or French, Italian, or German and doesn't really have authentic material on the website. Another thing we want to make sure we take the time to do is teach the students how to actually search for information. What I mean by that is, if we look at the pilot topic of study abroad, putting into the search engine study abroad in Italy is really not a great way to search for things. However, if when searching, they use the factor in their search, or they use a specific city or region in their search, it really helps um, um, focus their results. And last but not least, the T of the SMART goals, time bound. We want to make sure that when students are preparing their action plan, they've given themselves a timeline. I want to achieve this point of my research by a certain class period or by a certain date. And that's something that the teacher can help them set up and organize so that it is manageable with their use of class time and their use of home time. In phase 3 of the project, we have create and evaluate. So students here will really focus on the best practices for organizing and delivering an effective presentation. They're going to develop their presentation, which based on the prompt of the project and their research findings. They will practice the presentation and receive feedback. They will then refine their presentation after they've received this feedback. And this is where they will submit, well, first they'll prepare and then submit their personalized project reference doc via digital portfolio for their presentation on exam day. So what you've been noticing is I've also been repeating the word feedback. Part of the CED and project manual, there will be several references to certain feedback documents that will be made available to teachers and students on AP Classroom. So teachers will be able to print them out and distribute them out to their students, or they'll be able to fill them out digitally on AP Classroom. That'll be the choice of every teacher, how they'd like to use it. But what's really important is that we look at the project as they would be completing a project in a higher education classroom. The students need feedback to gain ownership on what they're doing. Meaning, if a student comes to me with their presentation for their research of the prompt, I am doing a disservice to that student by making corrections, because I am then taking the ownership of that presentation and making it mine. However, if I encourage the student to use the scoring guidelines and the feedback form to help refine and reorganize if necessary, add information if necessary to their presentation, the student is truly taking ownership over their own success. When someone takes ownership over something, they gain the confidence in what they're saying. They are proud and want to showcase the information that they've researched and prepared. So it's really important that we don't use the components of the project as a place to give go through and give grammatical corrections, etc. Everything else we do in our AP classrooms, from our formative assessments to maybe our little grammar assessments, that's where we're doing the correcting. Once we come to this project, and specifically phase 3, we really need to um, take away the security blanket and let the student own their presentation. And again, going back to the weighting, the presentation is worth 20%. So we really want students to be confident in what they're presenting and take ownership over the topic. Last but not least, we have phase 4 of the project, which is reflect and grow. This is the point in the project phases where the students will work on anticipatory questions for the Q&A. The Q&A questions will never be released prior to exam day in any format. But part of the ancillaries that will be made available on AP Classroom will be a anticipatory question document that will help students create and practice what types of questions may come during the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, that is where students will really demonstrate their cultural understanding. And if we go back to the learning objectives, um, skill category 3. That is where the students need to be able to describe cultural products, practices, and perspective, compare the cultural products and practices and perspectives among distinct communities, and reflect on the significance of these cultural products, practices, and perspectives. This is the part of the exam where um, the students truly get an opportunity to showcase the 3 Ps. And again, we want to focus on feedback and not correcting. And I just put a reminder there of the 3 Ps. I can't stress that enough. Product is obviously, I would assume, the easiest of the 3 Ps, but the practice and perspectives is what allows students to demonstrate their true understanding of something, because that's when they have to explain. That's when they have to explain the connection to their own community or to themselves. So really in the presentation and in the Q&A are really 2 areas where now in the free response section of the exam, the students need to show this cultural competence. Whereas in the old exam, in kind of an unauthentic manner, the students just did a cultural comparison, but again, not using any real authentic sources or prior knowledge. Here, with the presentation and the Q&A, the students are truly embracing these sources, the research that they've done on the target community, on their specific prompt and factors, and showcasing their understanding of this culture by giving examples, explaining, and connecting it to their own lives. So there's a way we could also look at the project, and that is in reference to cultural competency objectives, language objectives, and critical thinking. So one thing we should always keep in mind is that adding research to the AP course and exam truly helps these students prepare for higher education classes, regardless if they're in the target language or not. And it really helps them take ownership over their learning, because they're selecting the factors that they want to research. They're selecting what interests them about this prompt. So it's no longer you have to research this. Well, what if I'm not interested in that? If I'm not interested in something, I don't take ownership in it. So this project really helps students embrace the target culture and language in reference to something they're interested in. So if we look at the project as a whole, we have cultural competencies because students identify and describe those products and practices within the target language speaking world. They describe the connection between these products, practices, and the cultural perspectives, the values, the beliefs, the attitudes. And well, they reflect on the cultural products, practices, and perspectives among the distinct communities. As learning language objectives, they're obviously using the target language to interpret the explicit meaning. They're making inferences and they're synthesizing sources. They're using the target language to interact and communicate with others. And they're using the target language to synthesize, research, gather, and organize and present the information. So in the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that the email is no longer present on exam day validation because it is not an authentic task. However, interpersonal writing is still very much a useful skill and could be incorporated into the project when the students are doing their research. So, for example, with the practice project prompt of studying abroad, a student could write to an organization to inquire about their program of study. Will they get an answer? Maybe, maybe not. However, the actual skill of writing that email, writing that correspondence is still a very useful real world skill. So there is still plenty of opportunity to incorporate interpersonal writing throughout the course. Course content and critical thinking. Investigate a cultural theme related to the units and subcontext. You activate prior knowledge to identify initial considerations on a topic and then reflect and grow after the project is complete. You use research strategies to gather and synthesize information. You create and enact a research action plan, and you monitor your progress. So all these are very higher ed type of skills that students will use going forward in their academic careers. So, as a whole, in your language classes, you want to continue doing what you're doing. Do not reinvent the wheel, but rather adapt and change your lens. The recommended contexts are improved, they're not necessarily new. The project uses authentic sources and it allows students to use them because there are 6 to 8 provided by the College Board, but also find them. It introduces students to action plans with SMART goals. It has them prepare an authentic presentational speaking, and it has them participate in an authentic Q&A session. Incorporate everything as early as you can, meaning not only in your AP classroom, but in your other classes as well. And think of AP as a destination and not a starting point. So moving forward, as I mentioned, we had the recommended context, we had our old themes and our new contexts. So here what I've done is just pointed out that yes, personal and public identities as an actual theme or context no longer exists as a title. However, we could clearly see where in these new contexts we could use identity. It falls almost in any of the contexts. Global context, a little bit of a change from global challenges, but again, you're still looking at the world and how it interacts with the different countries interact with one another. And beauty and aesthetics really has been revamped, I would like to say, into art and creativity. Some concerns that at least come up in my school among my colleagues is, well, where's migration? Like, where would I include migration? Well, migration could be easily incorporated into global context because there's the sub-context of history. So migration falls easily there. Where are politics? Again, just thinking of the global context, the sub-context, one of them is policy and planning. Policy and planning takes into account politics. Gender roles. Gender roles could easily be incorporated into family relationships under the families and communities context. And again, identity can easily be adapted in the contemporary life context where you're talking about pop culture, sports and leisure, travel and tourism, etc. So technically, a lot of the topics and themes that you were covering, they're still there. You just have to reimagine the bigger context it now falls under. The project, we mentioned the authenticity of the sources. So if you just take a look at what you're doing in your other classes, so for example, in my level 1 classes, we start early with little mini projects, authentic videos, infographics, have them start to interpret meaning, have them start to pick a product. Even if they're simply picking a product and saying why they like that product and why that product is important to the target culture. It already starts to help them think of those 3 Ps. In like level 2 classes, build on those skills that you already started in level 1. Maybe present them with longer authentic sources. Start to have them look for their own sources. Again, they're interpreting meaning. Have them start writing a reflection about what they've learned, why it's important, how does it connect to their community. In the level 3 classes, that's where you can start to really help them organize their writing into an essay. You can have them start do mock interviews, which will eventually help them be more confident in the Q&A section of the AP exam. Again, they could present authentic sources, always focusing on those 3 Ps. And then finally, in the level 4 AP class, they're really practicing, researching, and creating these projects. They're refining the skills that they've spent their time in the program developing. So again, incorporate everything as early as you can. and think of AP as not the destination. I mean, as the destination, but not the starting point. And now, um, one other thing I just wanted to mention is that I'm sure you all have a lot of questions that maybe pertain particularly to your language and your language instruction in your class. I do want to mention that because this is a launch of a new exam, the College Board is offering grants to attend APSI's AP Summer Institutes this year for teachers, as it is a new exam. And those will obviously be conducted in the target language and be specific to your language. However, please keep in mind that everything I've shared with you today is applicable to the French, Italian, German, Spanish world language exams. So I hope that gave you um, a little insight into the changes, and I hope you're looking forward to applying them to your class. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Val, for that clear and insightful presentation. So before we move to the Q&A, I'd like to briefly highlight a few key takeaways from what we've seen today. I know we have a lot of questions, but we do need to mention this. So, as Val explained, the updated exam continues to emphasize authentic communication, cultural understanding, interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational skills, and the integration of research and project based learning. These are all practices that support meaningful language development in the classroom. So, at KWL Languages, the same principles guide the design of our instructional programs that you can see on the screen. And our materials focus on authentic text and media, cultural exploration, communicative task, and project-based learning experiences that help students investigate real-world topic and present their ideas. Because of this approach, our programs align very naturally with the updated exams direction, and we're also continuing to expand our support for AP teachers. Some of our best-selling programs would include also some AP preparation guides that are designed to help students practice the type of tasks they will encounter on the new exam and that we've talked about today. All of our programs are built around project-based learning, which helps students to engage with authentic resources, to explore cultural questions, and develop the communication skills that are centered on to AP. So, if you're interested in learning more about our programs, we would be very happy to send you sample materials so that you can explore them and see how they might work in your classroom. I'm going to share that link in a couple minutes. And with that, you can request some complimentary samples of our materials, which, as you can see, we have Generación AP and Reporteros, but we also have books for French, for German, and very soon we're going to have one for Italian as well. Now, let me just share that link with you now, just in case. And we're gonna jump into the Q&A. I know we have quite a lot of questions. We only have half an hour, but we'll try to take as many of those as we can. I see that some of those more or less repeat, so I think we should be able to cover a good base. And if there's any missing questions, you'll be able to send them to the email and we'll figure it out. So, Val, one of the first question is, will the project prompt be the same for all languages?
Yes, the project prompt will be the same for all languages. It'll just be presented in their target language, though. But the prompt itself will be the same across all of them.
Fantastic. And when will be the first new exam? Someone did mention that it will be next year, but could you help us out figure out when next year, more or less?
So the exam itself will always still be in May. So that'll be in May of 2027. So this current exam, May 2026, is still the old format that we are very well used to. The new one will be May 2027.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Then, based on the specificity of the project requirements and its release on the AP Digital Portfolio, it
Mhm.
sounds like the AP exam will no longer be available to students who are not enrolled in a traditional face-to-face school. So, for example, students who are homeschooled
Ex-
or studying
Or
Spanish
exam only.
independently.
Yeah. So currently the College Board is planning to release information available on the College Board websites for and to help support students that are only fall semester as well, because that's a concern if they're only fall semester and the prompt comes out in January. The question has come out to be a little bit problematic for those students to access the information. And also, as you alluded to, for the exam only students, which may not be enrolled in a course for one reason or another, or just independent learners. So the College Board is in the process of preparing course project material for them, and additional information will be available soon. They are hoping that it is available as soon as the summer for those types of students. So they are well aware of the challenges and are working on it.
Amazing.
Mhm.
And will each student have their own PPR uploaded on Bluetooth, sorry, on Bluebook for their own project presentation on test day?
Yes. So the PPR is individually prepared by each student, and it reflects the presentation that they have done the research for. So then on exam day, every individual student will receive their own. Currently, for the 2027 exam validation day, it will be printed and give it to them. Going forward, it might be something that will be accessed digitally, again, individually, but always on exam day. But for May 2027, it will be printed and given to each individual student by the proctor.
Fantastic. Just to confirm, is the presentation being marked during the exam?
No, there still will be an AP reading. So AP readers will still convene to listen to these presentations and use the analytical rubrics to grade them.
Perfect. And have the new rubrics been released yet?
Yes, the new rubrics, because also the essay also moved to an analytical rubric, so holistic rubrics are gone altogether for the free response section of the exam. So these rubrics are now available if you go on the College Board website, and you can download and view the CED for your specific language.
Okay. Next question is, what are the expectations on accent use?
On accent views. I assume they mean accents like typed accents or maybe
Yes,
spoken accents. I'm not
I, th-
sure.
I think
I'm
yes
sorry.
on type because the question is also linked to, will
The
there be
digital?
Chrome Store app available to add the
Oh,
accent
okay.
mark?
So the students, because it's going to be a digital exam, they will then be typing their essays using Blue Book. Within Blue Book, what they've designed now is that there'll be a accent pop-up window, for lack of a better term, that will be available to the students to use as they type. So if you're not familiar with Blue Book, when students access Blue Book, everything else on their Chromebook or their device is in lockdown mode. So everything has now been embedded into the digital platform to for students to be able to apply accents to their words and their writing.
Great.
Mhm.
And then will the AP Classroom adjust to all these changes?
Yes, the AP Classroom will be undergoing a revamp um, to include all these changes, and also available on AP Classroom once they've added everything and revamped everything. There will be sample projects in the target language for teachers. So I just ask, because I'm also very eager to see that, because as they did not do the pilot for Italian, they did do the pilot for Spanish, German, and Chinese, but French and Italian, they did not do the pilot. So we are really eager to see these sample projects in AP Classroom. So those will be made available to the teachers on AP Classroom.
Great. We have
Mhm.
a follow-up question on the accents. Can they use an
Yes.
international keyboard setting in lieu of using the pop-up box?
Um, to the best of my knowledge, the way it's been explained to me thus far is that it won't be necessary to use the international keyboard. And I believe the College Board right now is looking into if the student has the international keyboard turned on, if that will impede them in any way. And these types of tech questions, um, I've been informed will be answered well before we start our courses and well before students have to actually use Blue Book on exam day. So I think, to the best of my knowledge, they're just ironing out a few of those um, technical kinks, for a lack of better term.
Great. I'm going to take
Mhm.
a tiny second here for
Sure.
just two reminders. First,
Mhm.
because I'm seeing the questions still popping up, please remember that you're going to receive both the presentation and the recording of this. So don't worry about it. If you register, you're for sure going to receive those. And then we have a lot of information in the chat, and luckily we're taking a very good path. So I think we might be able to answer a lot more questions. But please, if you can just put those in the Q&A, because we might not be able to check all the questions in the chat. So even if you already typed it in there, just go to the bottom of the Zoom. You should see like a box. You just copy paste your question in there, because I'm going to be checking that once I finish with the ones we have picked up before. Okay. So going back to the questions and the PPR, is the teacher
Yeah.
responsible to upload all the PPRs?
No. So the students, they already do this in, I believe it's AP Digital Art and like AP African American Studies. They use the AP Digital Portfolio uploading, where every individual student will upload their own. So it is not something that the teacher will submit for them. It is just something that maybe, as a like me personally as a teacher, I would just monitor that everyone did it, because I would constantly remind my class on that day that if they don't upload a PPR through their digital portfolio, they will not receive anything printed out for them on exam day. So, yeah, it's not something I will have control over submitting for my students. They will have to submit it.
Great.
Mhm.
Um, will the project prompts be different every year?
Yes, the project prompts will differ every year, and therefore so will the factors connected to the project prompt topic.
Great. And is the investigation done digital or with the usage of the sources provided?
So the students in January will receive the prompt with the factors and the initial written reflection questions and 6 to 8 sources. Those sources um, will be provided on AP Classroom in a source materials packet, and therefore will be digital, but will be able to be printed out for use in the classroom as the teacher desires. So if you want to print them out and manually like highlight, annotate in class, you can do so. Those sources, just keep in mind, like I said in the presentation, are very general in nature, and therefore in the phases where the students in phase 2, where they're doing their investigation, that's where it's really important that they investigate more specific sources to be able to create a more substantial presentation.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Um, Another question is regarding the preparation time. One of the teachers mentions that students have fall semester only, so 18
Mhm.
weeks in their case, to
Correct.
prepare all the 6 themes, and they consider that this is not enough time if they're missing something. So, is there any kind of advice that you can give for this situation?
Um, so personally, my advice would be to go through the CED, um, which is available, like I mentioned, on the College Board website for your language. Is I personally would go through the CED, and it is very chock full of suggested activities, um, resources, etc. But if I were to have to, I personally would look at that and really just look at the nuts and bolts of the exam and the free response questions, and really only take out, and I know it sounds terrible to allude that something is not pertinent in the CED, but I would really just make sure to cover the pertinent topics and activities that correlate best to those skills and learning objectives to just increase the success rate for my students. And then just like I said before, for the exam-only students, the College Board is in the process of preparing material to support those fall semester only students. So keep an eye out for that.
Great.
Mhm.
Then, is each of the phases submitted to or scored by College Board?
No. So in like phase one, for example, the initial written reflection is the product. We could call it that the teacher will score. The College Board will only score everything that is produced on exam day. So therefore, it will be the argumentative essay. I know it has nothing to do with the project, but the argumentative essay, the presentation of the project, and the Q&A um, questions of the project. So those are the three components of the free response that are scored by the College Board.
Okay, and will College Board release an outline of ideas on how to organize a presentation, or is that a teacher-led task?
No. So in the CED, near the end of the CED is the project manual. The project manual is a day by day for those outlined 15 days, a day by day manual. Like literally you could follow it almost like lesson plans with individual activities for every phase, every part of the phase, and available on AP Classroom will also be all the ancillary documents that are referenced in the project manual. So for example, the feedback forms I was alluding to when I was talking about the phases, those will have, they'll have a copy of that feedback form on AP Classroom that they can print out and use. So the manual will take every teacher through every phase of the project with suggested and recommended activities.
Great. And since
Mhm.
you mentioned the phases, who
Yeah.
is giving the feedback in phase two? Is this in the manual? Could you help us out with this?
Sure. So the feedback in phase two will be provided by teacher, and it can also be student-facing feedback. So, for example, I anticipate doing a combination of both in my classroom. Um, Student-facing feedback, I think, is great, only because it really forces a student to digest and understand the scoring guidelines. And if a student understands how to get a certain score on something, then they are usually, it's much easier for them to attain that. Whereas if we only do teacher feedback and I'm the only one using the scoring guidelines, the student is a little bit left um, to figure things out on their own. So in phase two, uh, the feedback, like I said, in how I will use it in my classroom is that I will do a combination of self feedback for like self evaluation, use the scoring guidelines first on your own to see um, how your action plan is going, et cetera, et cetera. And then I will give feedback and then I'll have them do peer feedback. So all those documents though that I keep talking about, these feedback forms, they will be available on AP Classroom for use by the teachers and the students.
Great.
Mhm.
Now, going to the presentation, is the practice
Yeah.
presentation the same as the final presentation?
Yes. Well, I say yes loosely. So the students prepare this presentation in class and they practice it. They practice, they practice, they practice, and then they prepare that PPR. Now, that PPR is only an outline. So, really, the student is only going to be able to outline what they would like to eventually present in May. And they submit that on April 30th. So, the time between when they last practiced this exam in this presentation in class and exam day can be a long time depending on when the teacher does the project, also depending on when the student had this class or depending on when the exam only student did the project. So the presentation itself, the one that's practiced, will never be verbatim the same as the one that they present the day of the exam, but the purpose of the practice is for them to get the feedback from their peers and their teacher on how to properly give a presentation. And then on exam day, using their PPR, they should be able to recall and bring everything back together to do the presentation.
Cool. Another
Mhm.
tiny pause because I'm seeing a lot of comments about Italian and things we have
Oh,
Val here. I know that many of you are asking if CLED has any Italian materials that can be useful. So, first of all, I do invite you to check the webinar that we did with Val last year on Davvero, which could be
yeah.
really helpful and where you have a lot of interesting content. And I want to remind you that from the saga of the reporters, where we have reporteros, reporter francophone, that's reporter team, we're going to launch this year the Italian version, Giovanni Reporter 1 and 2, which is already project based, where you can get a lot of amazing projects, ideas, and content. And next year we'll launch in level 3. Usually the levels 3 and 4 in the saga are the closest to the AP exam, both on the difficulty level and the projects. So we do advise you to keep an eye on those. We're going to share the link again so you can request a free sample of those. Again, Davvero is already a great idea and it's a closed program. And you can already request a sample for Giovanni Reporter if you want to take a look at those. Okay? So, and then yes, for AP materials in general, remember that we have Generación AP, which is for AP Spanish, and this is already an AP manual. And we're going to be launching more materials and more content for you to use and to get amazing content. Plus, we are, of course, aware of all these changes and we are preparing new things. But going back to the questions, because I have never seen as many questions, to be honest, in a webinar, while we have a lot still.
Okay, okay.
So
I'll
another
try
one
to
that
help as best as I can.
you're doing amazing, I must
Okay.
say.
Good.
So thank you.
Of course.
And so another one, focusing more on potential problems. How
Mhm.
can the teachers prevent cheating, and what do they do if they find out about it?
Okay. So cheating, in our discussions, I don't know how to say this, the only cheating. The cheating that most of the world language teachers that I've talked to are afraid of is the use of AI to generate the presentation to well to really to generate any component of the project. So my recommendation is that when students are conducting the research, that the sources that they do find that they want to use, for example, one way to alleviate the chance that they generate something is that you can use lockdown browsers in AP Classroom, but you could also, if you're a Google platform school, you could use Google Docs. And for example, we have a software called Go Guardian. I know it goes by different names in different districts where you can see the screen of the student's computer while they're working. And with a Google Doc, for example, I could check revision history. I can track their typing, etc. We can also adopt AI frameworks that are pretty common now across different school districts. And you can use those icons to hold them accountable for that if you are allowing them for one reason or another to use AI to help frame their presentation, etc. Unfortunately, there's no clear response I can give for that. For cheating on the actual exam itself during exam day, um, to the best of my knowledge, since the exams have moved digitally, there hasn't been um, reports of cheating being uh, more rampant or anything like that because the students are individually at their Chromebook, at their device, and the blue book uh, takes them through each section. So while I'm presenting my speaking, my classmates are also presenting their speaking. So there isn't an opportunity for cheating in that way, or nor for like the essay. Everything is locked down, so they can't access any help, like or a translator or even a dictionary with the blue book.
Perfect. We actually had like several questions related to AI.
Oh,
Um, I'm just gonna stop leaving the feedback here because we have a lot more questions on other topics. But
okay.
please, everyone, when you feed the feedback form, let us know if this is a topic you're interested in because we could do a bit of research and maybe do a future webinar where we can abord this topic deep in a deeper way.
hmm
But
And just on the AI, the College Board will be releasing on the College Board their AI um, policies and rules. So keep an eye out for that as well.
great.
Mhm.
And how similar is this, like everything we've been talking about, to the AP research course?
So to the best of my knowledge, I don't have anything to do directly with the AP research course or even, for example, African American Studies where they have the project component, but part of the um, background into moving to project components in the AP exam was to do that, to mimic the research projects that other topics have. So I know as we go forward, they might still tweak stuff for the World Language Department only because it is new and languages, as we all know, are a little different than other topics. Um, but the idea here is to encourage across multiple AP courses this element of research and creating a product of sorts.
Okay,
Mhm.
and on the presentation day, on the
Yeah.
actual exam day, how long will the presentation be?
The presentation should be 3 minutes in length.
And do they compare and contrast the given sources and the ones that they research?
No, so the the presentation is designed for them to showcase their research. So, for example, if we take into consideration the prompt that was used for the pilots of this study abroad, um, for example, I'm going to use Italian for an example because it's the country I know the most about. So, for example, I would want to study at a technical institute in southern Italy. So, all I would do is all my research would have to center in an Italian region in the south. So, for example, Calabria. And then I would pick a city and then I would research those factors. My presentation would then showcase my knowledge on that prompt. So if the prompt was about study abroad and my factors were housing, uh, the specific courses I wanted to take at this technical institute, and the community that I would interact with, my presentation would highlight that those products, practices, and perspectives of that target community for that prompt. So I'm not necessarily in my presentation saying like in a specific source this is what it said and in another source it said this, but in my presentation I will naturally most likely allude to my sources. So I would probably say something to the effect of like during my research I came across a website that gave me information about X, Y, and Z, and this connects to my topic because of this. So at no point in the presentation will the students have to compare the information in their sources or even um, summarize source information.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Um, then we talked about cheating before when we focused on AI, but someone asks, how will the College Board make sure that teachers are not doing more than they should to help the students correct or polish their presentation?
Um, well, so there's not. I'll be very honest. There's not so much that the College Board can do to prevent a teacher from mm, having too big of a hand in the creation of the presentation. But one thing to keep in mind is that let's pretend I am that kind of teacher where I rewrite my students' entire presentation. Well, what becomes problematic there is that the student will only have a certain word limit when they prepare their PPR. So they're only going to be able to really outline the items that they want to present. And then on exam day, that's all they're going to get. So whether or not the teacher um, really um, jumped in and did too much won't help this kid on exam day. Because on exam day, that kid still has to only use their PPR outline to present their topic. So they won't ever get their the entire presentation that they prepared during the project printed out. They will only get an outline to help them present.
Okay. Then, what do you do when only a few students are taking the AP but not the whole class?
Um, so I was in a little bit similar situation when I had my Italian 4 students in the same class as my AP students. So that tends to happen with a lot of languages, specifically Italian, because we're a smaller population. So personally, I would still have the non-exam takers still do the project. There's still really valuable skills that the students can gain by partaking in the project. So just for example, like an essay, I'm sure that even if the students aren't taking the exam on exam day, we're still teaching them how to analyze sources and argue a point of view on an essay. So similarly, I would have the students practice the presentations, embrace the scoring guidelines, because at the end of the day, the skills that we're developing for these students will only help them go forward into a higher ed classroom where they will do some sort of presentation, and then eventually in their careers they will take part in a job interview, etc. So those skills that come out of doing this project are really beneficial, kind of regardless if they end up taking the AP exam or not.
Great. We're gonna
Mhm.
just take a couple more questions because we have 5 minutes.
Sure.
But a very interesting question, actually. If a student deviates dramatically with their presentation on exam day from what they initially uploaded, will that
Mhm.
count against them?
No, it will not. Um, the for example, the AP reader will not receive a copy of the student's PPR. So if the student does deviate, the AP reader won't know if the student deviated from their initial outline. So if on exam day the student finds themselves talking more about one of the factors, maybe over than what was presented in their PPR, it will not be held against them at all.
Fantastic.
Mhm.
And on the Q&A section,
Yeah.
if you could just give us a bit more information, how does it work? Is it
Yeah.
live?
So it is still recorded. Um, like the simulated conversation was, there is a big difference is that the questions are played twice now. So, for example, the student will hear a question, there'll be a very slight pause. They will hear the question again, and then the student will have 40 seconds to respond to the question instead of the old 20 seconds with the simulated conversation. And that pattern will follow for all 4 questions.
Perfect. And is it like a simulated conversation?
Um, not not really a conversation because it is a Q and A. So um there is no longer that creative use of the language on the recorded part of it. It is literally a question. So for example, the recording might ask the student, after having conducted the research, what recommendations do you have for someone that's interested in studying abroad? So the student will hear that twice and then they'll have 40 seconds to answer. So there is no real fun conversation per se. It's just literally Q&A.
Okay, and will there also be available any videos on the college board to help students with project preparation or any kind of material to help them prepare themselves?
Yes. So right now on AP Classroom, there is nothing connected to the project nor the new CED. But upon completion of this academic year, AP Classroom will be updated, and on AP Classroom, there will be sample projects. So therefore, it would have all components of the project in the target language for the teachers and students to explore.
Great. And given the time, actually, since we're talking about this, the last
Yeah.
question could be if you have any idea on when will this be available and what will be the timeline for all this new content on the new exam available for teachers.
So the new CED and the project manual are already available. So if you log into the College Board and you go to, I believe the heading is Course and Exams, and you go to your language, the current updated effective fall 2026 CED is available in for Spanish, Italian, French, German, etc., Chinese, Japanese, and everything we talked about and everything you saw in the presentation is available in print. But what is really imperative for you guys to look at is the project manual that's part of that CED, but that is all available right now. Scoring guidelines, everything.
Amazing. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
of course.
So, since we only have 1 minute, I think we can close the Q&A.
Okay.
So just bear with me for a couple seconds. Before I say anything, of course, thank you again, Val, for sharing
Of
your
course.
expertise
Been
with
my
us.
pleasure.
So really thank you because this was very useful. We saw a lot of engagement.
Mhm.
So I also want to thank you, everyone who joined us this evening and who participated in the discussion. We truly appreciate your time and all your dedication to supporting your students. Again, before we finish, just a couple final reminders. You will receive a follow-up email after the webinar, not immediately after, but this will include the recording of today's session and the presentation slides. If you want to download your certificate of attendance, you just need to complete the form that I will send in the chat in a couple of seconds. We uploaded that before, but if you didn't see it, we're going to put it now. You will also find a short feedback survey that I talked about before. Please take a moment to share your thoughts. If there's anything that you would like to dig deeper into, let us know in there. And we will also put again the link where you can request some samples of our materials if you want to explore them further. As I said, we have many materials that could really apply for the AP exam or that could be helpful. We have a lot of project-based learning materials. We have many authentic documents that you can explore, and we will be offering many novelties about this soon. So keep in touch and do request a couple samples so you can see what we're doing. And before we wrap up, once again, thank you for Val for the insightful and practical presentation and for everyone who helped us. I also shared the link with our future webinars. Take a look at those. And with that, just want to wish you all a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you at a future Clat World Languages webinar. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.